Welcome everyone. This is our session on language revitalization begins at birth, supporting intergenerational language development in early childhood. Very excited to see all of you here, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. Hey, hopefully you can see my screen.
Beautiful.
All right. Once again, welcome everyone. Very excited to see all of you here. Ki onde da de onde batsan. Gom gima akoi ka. Anadarkoka akiro. This is Melody Redbird Post, and I am the director of the National Center on Tribal Early Childhood Development, and very excited to be here with you. I am a member of the Kiowa tribe, and I reside here in Southwest Oklahoma. And this session was co-developed with my colleagues Shar Shank and Lisa Ojibwe. And Shar, unfortunately, could not make it today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Melody. Andi shajaba madazian Lisa Ojibwe and the Jinakas, Chimokman Minwa Ojibwe Kwe and Dao. I'm Lisa Ojibwe from the Infant Toddler Specialist Network within the Child Care State Capacity Building Center, and I'm from the Ojibwe Nation. All right, so during today's session, we're going to touch on research regarding language acquisition from birth to 2 years old, strategies and resources for expanding language revitalization to include an intergenerational approach, and partnerships to support language revitalization across early childhood and school age programs. So first, we're going to start out with research. So researchers have studied babies from all over the world and how they learn languages. So going from no language at birth to becoming fully fluent by 2 years old in any language or multiple languages. And you'll see on this slide at the top left that there are currently 6,909 languages in the world today. And according to the US Census Bureau, 169 indigenous languages are still spoken. So language revitalization is of critical concern as the first language speakers are often elders and sometimes beginning to pass away. So many of the tribes have language immersion and language revitalization in place for various age groups, with elders passing their knowledge to the next generation. And the earlier it's introduced, the greater the chance of strengthening the language, developing more fluent speakers, and with babies, the possibility of new first language speakers. So when you're speaking to a baby, have you ever wondered and wanted to ask them, do you understand what I'm saying? Or is this just nonsense or random sounds to you? So researchers have conducted brain imaging studies to find out. So in this image, you can see there's a baby listening to language, and there are MEG images that you can see on the screen. And it shows that newborns have activity in the Wernicke's area of the brain, which is where we process language, so listening and comprehension. And you can also see on the screen that around the 6-month-olds and the 12-month-olds showed brain activity in the Broca's area of the brain, which is active when we produce spoken language or even sign language to convey thought or express it to another person. So in the next slide, you'll see some brain imaging studies that include PET scans, MEGs, MRIs, and NIRS. So you can see on the left what it's like for the baby when they're listening to the languages, as these researchers are trying to figure out what is their brain doing, and if they hear it as sound or if they hear it as language. And then to the right, you see the images that are produced from this type of research. So it's utilized to see what the infants and toddlers' brains are doing in response to hearing languages from all over the world. So you can see some examples of the images produced by the different methods on this slide. And then all of the findings, I'll try to kind of summarize along these age groups that you see on the screen. But basically, all the different researchers found that babies are the champions of learning languages, any language in the world. And an intergenerational approach is important so that infants, older children, parents, grandparents, elders, teachers, and caregivers, and everyone involved in the child's life, they help to create opportunities for language development. So for example, at the top left, you see an image of a newborn. So hearing develops in utero before they're born, between the 6th to 7th month of pregnancy. And Dr. T. Barry Brazelton, who's a well-known pediatrician, found that newborns at birth, if they're put in between the pediatrician and their parent, and they both speak quietly to them, the newborn almost always turns their voice to the parent. So they turn to the voice that they know and that they've heard since they were in utero. So speaking gently to them is important. It's an important place to start, and singing songs in the language. Infants were found to prefer songs that they heard when they were in utero. And the fetuses can also be startled. So making sure that the pregnant mom is in a calm and gentle environment as much as possible is very important. And in that next image, you see roughly a 2-month-old. So at 2 months of age, research identified that 2-month-old babies can match vowel sounds that they hear with the corresponding lip movements. So they are lip reading and they are studying and mimicking facial expressions. They're matching sounds to the linguistic input and phonetic detail of the language. So important to speak to the babies in the language. And taking your time when you speak to them to enunciate, because they're carefully listening, they're watching your mouth, and sometimes you'll see that they're trying to imitate. There's research from Metzloff that shows some of this imitation that they do even when they're very, very small. They're trying to mimic the lip movements. And you'll see next at 4 months, 6 months, and 8 months of age, there's this range for babbling. So there are researchers that studied babble, and they analyzed all of the sounds and all the data and studied babies from all different countries, all different languages. So Du Bois and Lombardi studied babbling and first words and inference from Japan, England, France, and Sweden. And they found that at 6 months old, the infants produce universal sounds when babbling. But by the time they are 8 months of age, the babies are babbling differently, and it becomes language specific. So the language that you surround them with, that everybody is using with the babies, they start to play with those sounds. So they're using the sounds of their particular language. And so it's important that from birth to 6 months of age, that everyone is working together to provide words in the language, small sentences, small vocabulary, by speaking to the babies in the language. Also, bilingual labeling of items in the classroom and the home environment can help the teachers, the parents, and the caregivers to remember words to use for toys that they like, or foods, or greetings, or small sentences and songs posted in the activity areas. So for example, with greetings, in our language, in Anishinaabe, we might say ani for hi, or bonjour. We could say minal gishigat, or minal kijet for good morning. You might ask the baby how they're doing at school, won't respond yet. So you might say, Ani shaje ayayan, or Ani shaje pamadaziyan.
9 schools that we do have in our district.
We have a little bit of background noise.
About 175 students.
Okay. And then saying goodbye each day. So they're hearing something like Bamampi Kowamin, see you later. So they're hearing these daily greetings for hellos and goodbyes, or their favorite toys. Like if there's a car, you could say Daban, brum, brum. So if they're looking at the toy and they're hearing the sound, it helps them put it together. Or if they love a dog and you say numush for dog, numush, so you're showing them and you're talking to them, it makes it much more helpful. Or singing songs, if they hear a sound, so like bells or a rattle, like katagnan, they'll remember it. You can even sing to them like Tatagnan Medresinman Kinlanko, Gijim Kwechmayan. So any materials that you have in the classroom, in the home that they're interested in and that they like, so that there are sensory experiences for things that they see, things that they hear, and things that they taste. There's mealtime every day. So you might be asking them small sentences like, "Kapakadena, are you hungry?" And you could say, you could imitate and say, "Apchigoten bakade," like, "Yeah, I'm very hungry. Ambe wisneda, come on, let's go eat." And in foods that they like. So if it's pinik, like they like potatoes, or it's mashiman, because maybe they like apples. You know, babies eat soft foods, so maybe it's squash, like kosman. So while they're eating the mushed up squash, they could be tasting it and listening to the words that you're talking with them through mealtime, through the toys, through the greetings, and even outside. So if they come in and it's cold and they've got their coats on when you're greeting them, having some words to support either the parent or the teacher, because not everybody is as strong in the language as some of the elders and other teachers. So if they have little reminders up, they may remember to say like, "Oh, kasina gojing, kasina nongom, it's cold today." Or maybe it's hot and they're saying, "Shta ha gajate," it's hot. Or if they heard a sound like a bird, and then you're learning the word for beneshi. Mommy, I want popsicle. Okay, got you, buddy. And some people are able to elaborate on what type of bird it is. So if they hear a crow and they're saying andek, or if they hear a robin and they could point out the robin and explain the word for that with opiche to help expand the child's vocabulary and learn about plants and animals in their environment. So there are lots of ways to do this. Some people, it comes to them very naturally, and other people may need a little support. So all of you as educators can help the teachers and the programs and the parents and the families, foster families as well. They may need some support with the language in different ways, and somehow involving consultation with elders and the language department and truly bringing together this intergenerational approach. So at the bottom right of the screen, after all of this, so giving the baby opportunities to learn language and small sentences and vocabulary, you'll see that the researchers found between 9 months and 14 months of age, around the time they start to produce words, and the language has become, their babbling became language specific. They also studied babies from Algeria, England, China, and France, and they found that the babbling replicates the phonetic units used in their particular languages. So they started narrowing in on the language, and they found that between 14 months of age and 20 months, so a year to a year and a half, the brain activity in response to language input started to settle in that Broca's area where we produce language, and in the Wernicke's area where we're processing and comprehending language. So some people introduce the language of your particular tribe later. They think the babies need to already be speaking. But all of this research, we're hoping to emphasize that it's really important to give babies these language opportunities, and they may become the next generation of first language speakers. So as you can see, this language immersion and language revitalization is extremely valuable for infants and toddlers, and you can prepare them to become first language speakers to help revive the language and strengthen it with children, parents, and families. So with that, we have a discussion question for you. We'd love for all of you to begin sharing with each other in the chat box your responses to these two questions. So if you don't see the chat box, at the bottom of your screen, if you hover over it, you'll see the opportunity to chat. If you click on that, the chat box will show up, I believe, to the right of your screen. So the first question is about age ranges. What age ranges does your tribe or Indigenous community involve in language revitalization efforts? So if you could share some of that in the chat. Some tribes, they only have it for the older people, like adults or maybe high school students. Other tribes might only have it for preschool, and some have kind of a longer expansion from infants and toddlers all the way up through K through 12. So we're hoping you all will share with each other.
And Lisa, while everyone is thinking, and for some of you, the toolbar is at the bottom of your screen. Some of you, it might be at the top of your screen. So kind of hover the top or bottom, and then click on the little button that says more, and then you'll find the chat. We actually do have a question in the chat, Lisa, based on what you just shared. So I just saw Maria had a question. Will the wearing of masks now halt the language process for the 2-month-old?
So it's a concern that some early childhood educators have been worried about because they can't see your face, or some children that are hearing impaired and they need to read lips. So sometimes people will choose to get the masks that have plastic in this area so that there's still some covering, but that they can see your face. So that's an option as well. And there are other ways, but hearing the sound, showing the toys, using their name, and really making it relevant and important to them is the best you can do. And if you can get those masks, they can also see your face to see you enunciate. If they're home and they're with their family, they might not have to wear the coverings when they're with their parents. So that's another opportunity for them to be able to kind of do the lip reading and the mimicking of facial expressions. And I see you all are starting to share in the chat box, which is beautiful. So please feel free to share and see each other's responses. It helps to kind of inspire and give each other ideas. We also, now that that's going, the second question we have for you that we'd like you all to share is, how does your tribe or community strengthen or support language revitalization? Because this is done in a lot of different ways. And so anything that you'd like to share could be really innovative in helping each other. And we'll give you some time to reflect and share your thoughts before we move on. Yeah, and I see some of you have been able to share the age groups. Beautiful. So a lot of early childhood examples so far. Wonderful. So there are a lot of strengths with the preschool age group and more with infants and toddlers. And the Inupiaq team has shared that the chat keeps moving, that they have 2-week language immersion camps in the summer as well throughout Zoom, which is beautiful. You can reach a lot of families that way. Okay, wonderful. So we hope you continue to share and kind of read each other's responses and get ideas as well. And any other thoughts you have on this second question that you might be proud of, ways that your tribe strengthens or supports language revitalization. So we'd like you to continue using the chat box to share ways with each other, to ask questions as we move on to the next section regarding strategies for an intergenerational approach.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. So as we go into this next session, as Lisa shared, feel free to keep entering into the chat, and Lisa will be monitoring the chat and stopping me if we have any questions or things we want to share. So awesome. So let's talk now for a little bit about strategies specifically that you might think about in incorporating an intergenerational approach to tribal language revitalization in your program and your community. So first, we're going to start by looking at what some of the research says around language revitalization and intergenerational approach strategies. So just wanted to start with this quote. As sovereign nations, American Indian and Alaska Native communities have been addressing issues of Native language and culture revitalization for many years, as all of you know. More recent understandings of the importance of supporting tribal language development in the early years and the role of early childhood education in this process have led to a shift towards supporting early childhood programs as allies to Native language revitalization efforts. So some of you are already doing that, already doing some work in the early childhood sphere, and that is very wonderful. Love to hear that. Another piece of the research, research has found that AIAN teen parents who have strong cultural connections are more likely to have positive parenting and family functioning and less likely to engage in substance abuse. And so just really wanted to highlight that as you think about different populations that you're already including, or maybe populations that are potential to include in your current language revitalization efforts. So the next piece I wanted to highlight, home and center-based early childhood education and care programs like tribal home visiting, tribal Head Start, tribal early Head Start, tribal childcare can support the inclusion of Native language and culture in the program's home to school connection efforts. And these programs are in a unique position to get to know families and build upon families' specific cultural strengths. So just wanted to highlight a few of what the research says. There's a lot of research out there now to really back up a lot of the initiatives and efforts that you might be thinking about and ways that you might be thinking about expanding your current efforts. So focusing on cultural strengths has the potential to build trust and provide opportunities for collaboration between families and program staff to support young children's engagement with Native language and cultural practices. And really thinking about those all important aspects of building trust and thinking about what are opportunities for your program to collaborate between the children's families and your program staff and really build those bridges and enhance those connections between the programs and the families. And then connecting AIAN children and families with their Native language and cultural practices supports a worldview that promotes cognitive, physical, and emotional well-being for children, their families, and the program staff working in tribal communities. And so just really wanted to point out that a lot of what you're already doing or things that you might be considering doing in your program, there's a lot of research behind you to support that, and really thinking about the cognitive, physical development and emotional developmental benefits to incorporating and really thinking about multiple generations to be included in your language revitalization strategies. We wanted to share this quote from a tribal early childhood education program administrator who shares, "I believe that in our language and culture, we find the strength and resiliency that have allowed our people to survive to now. And I think that through that, we'll continue to thrive as tribal nations." Just wanted to offer that. Wanted to also highlight a resource. So this research comes from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families. There is actually a series of research briefs that have been recently released. This one just came out in 2020 and wanted to highlight this. And while I'm sharing this, we are also going to put a link to this in the chat box in case you are wanting to access this to read further. So this is actually the home and community Native language and cultural experiences among AIAN children in Region 11 Head Start. Findings from the American Indian and Alaska Native Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey. And the survey, so the initial research was actually conducted about 5 years ago, and now we're starting to see some of the reports come out, and really wanted to make sure that it gets in the hands of practitioners, of program staff and administrators and educators who can use this to continue to support the wonderful work that you're already doing in your communities. All right. And then another resource we wanted to highlight is another recently released resource, And this is actually from the First Peoples Cultural Council, which serves First Nations in Canada, and has tons of resources that are also very relevant for the tribal nations here in the US. And this resource is called Language for Life, Nourishing Indigenous Languages in the Home. And we're going to put the link to this resource in the chat box as well, in case you haven't seen this. This is just a little booklet, a little guide that you can use either with your program staff, or you could even share it with your partner programs, or with your families, with grandparents who might be raising their grandchildren, parents, aunties, uncles, or if you're a childcare program or you work with a childcare program, maybe you have relative home providers that are caring for children at home right now, especially now due to all of the craziness with the pandemic. A lot of children are being cared for in home environments. So if you're looking for ideas and tips and strategies on how to expand your language revitalization efforts in the home, this is a wonderful little booklet to check out. All right, so now we wanted to talk specifically about what are some strategies that you might consider. And as we kind of go through this next section, encourage you to really think about what you're already doing. Really appreciated you sharing those strengths that you saw in your programs. And many of you are probably already doing many of these strategies. And so really want to kind of encourage you to think about how you might expand your current program activities. So wanted to first talk about community events as a strategy. So community events introduce adults and children to your tribal language in a fun and enjoyable way. And also community events allow for participants to control their own level of participation. So people may not feel as forced to participate. They show up at an event and it's fun, it's engaging, and they can choose whether or not they want to participate, and if so, how much they want to participate. And also community events really provide that opportunity to share knowledge with each other, and not only share knowledge between families, but also between families and program staff as well. So everyone's there to share knowledge and learn from one another. Community events also really create a safe space to practice and use the language. So when you think about creating a safe space, a lot of times, I know in my tribe, there's a lot of challenges around adults learning our language because there's a lot of fear about saying it wrong and being misunderstood by our speakers and by our elders. And so when you have a community event and really create a safe space, then you really build an opportunity to have adults who are participating. So those parents, those family members, even your program staff or partner program staff can really feel motivated to practice and use their language really in the context. So here on the screen, you see a picture of a community event in an early childhood setting. So this is in a tribal childcare classroom. And this was a lunch setting where parents and families were invited. And this was all conducted in the language. And so there's an opportunity for children to also hear the language being spoken in a real world context. Also, community events really helps maintain motivation to learn. So once you get people engaged in your language revitalization initiatives and your programs, they're participating, having ongoing events, it really creates that motivation and really helps people stay motivated and remain willing to participate in the effort. And of course, your events also can provide a multi-generational setting. So speaking of community events, I saw in the chat that there's a couple of you that might be just launching or maybe just starting to participate in your tribal language revitalization initiatives. And so wanted to offer this to consider. This is a planning community language events resource. And this is through the Adams
Yes,
and also, oh, I'm hearing some background noise, just gonna make sure to remind everyone to mute just in case. And then this is also was published through the First Peoples Cultural Council. We'll put the web link in the chat box, but this is also a handy little guide that has a lot of ideas, has a list of different type of language events that you could plan and implement. It has lots of tips and ideas for implementing successful community language events. So just wanted to share this with you, just in case you're looking for some additional ideas to share. So speaking of events, so there's all types of events that you could have, right? And many of you have probably already done many of these. So your community language events could involve singing in your language, could involve storytelling, could involve elders or your cultural knowledge keepers sharing stories, as well as in times when it's safe to do so. You could even do cultural field trips. Also, you could do language events that involve tribal place names. So we know that place names are very, there's very sacred, meaningful places in our communities. And so really thinking about ways to incorporate place names into an event. Strategies like using Google Earth or Google Maps to do some geomapping, using your tribal language and place names and involving that in a community event. Another type of event is involving language games. So there's lots of ideas out there for different age groups. And so you might think about ways to plan language games for the different ages that will be represented at your community event. So thinking about when you're expanding your events to include multiple generations, perhaps having language games that could be tailored for the different age groups. So maybe you have infants and toddlers, and you want to have a game with the parents and the caregivers who have infants and toddlers, and they could go and maybe they want to play a little game with the hands and tell some stories. And then maybe in another corner of the space, you might have the preschoolers working with their families and doing something a little bit different, but all in the language. And then of course, you could also involve language projects. So this would be things like if there is a specific memorial or a different specific thing going on in your community, you might develop a language project around that. So maybe there's a story that the elders are really interested in getting translated and sharing that with the community. And maybe you design your whole event around releasing a little book or a video or a workbook or a set of materials in the language. And then of course, one very common event, at least I know in my community it's really common, is having community meals or feasts. And I know that nowadays, at least in the past 8 months, it's been really hard to do that. It's not been safe. So that's just something, to consider. And also, a lot of these events, really thinking about what are some ways that your program has implemented virtual or online community events. So there's definitely some opportunities there to think about how can these community events be translated into a virtual space and still engage your community, engage your families and your parents and your program staff, even though we all can't safely be in the same place during this time. So speaking of virtual and online, we wanted to share another resource with you. So this is called the Virtual and At-Home Language Revitalization Program Ideas. This is also from the First Peoples Cultural Council, and we thought this might be something to consider. And I know there are a couple other sessions here during the Language Summit that specifically are focused on online language revitalization. So hopefully if you're interested in that, you'll get a chance to check those sessions out. And we'll put the link to this resource in the chat box. And again, this resource just has some ideas for safely implementing and planning virtual or at-home language revitalization initiatives or activities. And again, this is something you could share with your program staff or with your families, or even with your home providers who are caring for the children. All right. So the next strategy we wanted to talk about is the Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, as a strategy. So many tribal nations, there are 265 tribal nations who receive the CCDF funding from ACF and the Office of Child Care. And so for those of you who might be listening to this or on the line today, just wanted to share that all tribal CCDF grantees are required to spend a percentage of their total CCDF funding on activities designed to improve the quality of child care services and increase parental options for access to high quality child care. I just wanted to point out that tribal language revitalization efforts would be considered a way to improve the quality of child care services for children from birth all the way up through age 13 years old. So just wanted to share that with you. If your program and your tribe has a CCDF grant, has a tribal child care program, then you might want to think about potentially asking them what they currently do and how you might partner with them, specifically on your language revitalization initiatives. So for tribal CCDF, tribal lead agencies, really thinking about implementing language revitalization using CCDF funds. So it really starts with the tribal CCDF plan. And so the CCDF plan is a document that is essentially the grant funding application to receive CCDF funds that the tribe submits. And in that plan are all of the details about how the program is going to be implemented over the 3-year plan cycle. So CCDF grants last for 3 years at a time, and the plans are effective for 3 years. And in the plan, tribal lead agencies can include tribal language revitalization as an initiative in their quality activities section. And when tribes are thinking about using CCDF funds to implement language revitalization activities, we really encourage tribes to think about what is the long-term goal. So by the end of that 3-year plan cycle, what is the outcome that is expected of that language revitalization initiative? And so once you set those long-term goals based on what you wrote in the CCDF plan, then you'll want to really think about what are the short-term objectives and the specific action steps that you'll need to take in order to make that goal a reality by the end of the 3-year plan cycle. And in order to do this, we really support tribes in thinking about their plan in an incremental timeline. So really thinking about what do you want to accomplish in each of the 3 years of the grant, of the program. And so, for instance, if your tribe and your program has an initiative and your CCDF program has partnered, maybe they have an initiative on the goal after 3 years would be to support the training and professional development of early childhood language teachers to use the language in classrooms, as well as supporting providers with using the language in family child care home settings. And so we would encourage tribes to think about, so what are the things in that goal that you want to accomplish in the first year? So what is realistic in the first 12 months of implementing your program? And so once you have established that goal for year 1, then you can really think about, so what's next? What do you want to accomplish in year 2? And so on until you get through year 3 and the end of the plan cycle. And so if you have the goal of training your providers and your staff to support language revitalization in your tribal language in the classrooms and home settings for early childhood, then maybe in year one, you'd work on making sure all the partnerships that you need to be successful are established. So really reaching out to partners and really thinking about setting up all of the policies and the procedures that you would need to be successful in year one. And then in year two, maybe that's when you actually start planning the training. Maybe you start implementing the training initially, and then doing some continuous quality improvement to see what needs to be changed. And then by year three, you'd have your initiative fully implemented and be well on your way to achieving that initial long-term goal that you set out. So with all of that in mind, just wanted to pause before we go to our next session, and see if anyone has any questions. I just wanted to see, Lisa, if you saw any questions in the chat box.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. So Conestoga, Scott shared that Conestoga are not enrolled at this point, but they're the Language and Cultural Authority is a language revitalization nonprofit for their people, and wondering if nonprofits are eligible for CCDF, which is a really good question.
Yes, that is a really good question. So typically CCDF grants go to federally recognized tribes or tribal consortia grantees. So as a nonprofit, what we've seen is there are some tribal consortia that operate through a nonprofit mechanism. So a consortia comes into play when a federally recognized tribe has fewer than 50 tribal children included in their tribal child count in their service area, which is where they want to implement services. And after looking at all the children ages 0 to 13 years old, so that's something to think about. If you do want to get involved, CCDF is all about partnerships. So really encourage you to reach out in your tribal community or the tribes that are around you and explore if there are tribes in the area that have CCDF, how your organization might be able to support them and leverage their current initiatives.
And then one more question, because we have 15 minutes. There was a question about, are there any tribal programs that have 102.477 and has the CCDF formulated into their plan that allows language revitalization programs to optimize funds for goals and activities?
Very good question. Let's see. So if you're asking specifically, which specific 477 grantees or 477 tribes currently include language revitalization as a quality activity in their CCDF program, I would have to do a little bit of digging on that to get back to you. I can think of off the top of my head that Cook Inlet Tribal Council is a 477. They do include language revitalization in their initiative, and they have some amazing comprehensive services. So that's one example that I can think of off the top of my head, but we'd certainly be willing to get back to you on that. Oh, and since you mentioned, I see Scott and Ruby's answers, so thank you so much for sharing. That does remind me, Akwesasne, St. Regis Mohawk Tribe they have CCDF, they have Head Start, Early Head Start. They also are 477 grantee, and they do also have language revitalization and language immersion in their program. So great examples. So, and if you have questions, we have our contact information at the end of this session. And so if you want specific, feel free to reach out to us, email us, and we'd be happy to follow up with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue into some partnership considerations, which we've kind of hit on here a little bit. So when you're thinking about expanding your current language revitalization efforts, we wanted to offer these considerations. So encourage you to think about how can you or how do you currently partner with families in your community? And we would also offer maybe not only the families that are participating in the programs, but other families who maybe are not yet participating. And how can you partner with those families to engage them in your language revitalization efforts? And also, we know many of you already do this, but consider how you consult with your tribal elders and your tribal knowledge keepers to really make sure that they are engaged in your efforts and keep them engaged as well. And then if you are an early childhood program that is not currently working with your tribe's language or culture programs, really encourage you to collaborate and consider reaching out to tribal language. Maybe you have a tribal language preservation program or a tribal museum that offers different programs, and really think about considering them as a partner in your efforts. And then also, I saw that many of you are already serving multiple age groups or thinking about serving multiple age groups in your efforts. And so really thinking, encouraging you to think about how could you coordinate across age groups. So if your program serves one age group, how could you partner and work with programs that serve other age groups in your community? And then another resource that we've heard a lot of examples about is connecting with childcare providers, especially relative care providers. So we know there are many tribes who operate tribal childcare centers on the reservations or in their communities. But we also know that especially due to this pandemic, there's been a huge shift in childcare in tribal communities to using family childcare home providers and lots of relative providers as well. So we've seen, we've heard that a lot as a strategy. And so really encourage you to, if you do have tribal childcare in your community, consider partnering with the tribal lead agency to connect with childcare providers who serve children in the home. And then some additional partnership considerations. So if you are the tribal lead agency for CCDF, or if you want to partner with the tribal lead agency that has the CCDF funding in your community, you might want to think about how could you support providers caring for tribal children through language and culture resources. So what resources are already available in your community, and what resources can you work together and collaborate on to create and disseminate? Also thinking about tribal elders in the classrooms, as well as bringing tribal elders and knowledge keepers into the different settings that childcare is in the community. I know nowadays you have to be really creative about that, right? We want to keep our elders safe. So we've heard a lot of tribes who have been really innovative with creating videos or even using Zoom sessions as a platform to maintain connections between elders and the classrooms and the children and families. Another partnership consideration is if your tribe or your program has a language coordinator, or if you know of a language coordinator in another program, encourage you to reach out and make some connections with them. And here is a list of possible partnership considerations. So we talked about tribal CCDF programs, and some of you I noticed are already your tribal Head Start programs or early Head Start programs. Perhaps partnering with your tribal museum, if you have boys and girls clubs available in your community. Some of you are also representing K-12 schools, so thinking about including K-12 schools as a partner as well. And then of course, if you have tribal powwow organizations or any cultural organizations that organize events or activities in your community, they're another valuable partner as well. We did want to share this resource. So this is a report that was released a few years ago, and it's called a report on tribal language revitalization in Head Start and early Head Start. And this has some really wonderful examples from tribal programs who have gone through the whole process of doing the planning and the visioning for starting language revitalization in tribal early childhood settings, and really walking through the whole process of planning and then implementing. and then seeing the outcomes of their initiatives. So check it out. We can put the link in the chat box as well. All right, so now we have a little discussion. I know we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Melody. So we'll try to move quickly. It's a speed round. If you work with birth to 5, if you're involved with the birth to 5 age group, which some of you may be, what are ways that you're connecting with K through 12? Because we do want to focus on this intergenerational approach. And some of you have already started sharing in the chat box some beautiful ideas and ways that you do that. If you work with the K through 12 population, what are ways that you connect or partner with birth to 5? So we're just hoping you'll share from your perspective about ways to create a continuum of language learning. So we'll give you a few minutes to think about that. How are you kind of bridging that gap between different age groups? Ones you work with and ones that you don't. And then the second part of that question is, from your perspective, what are the gaps and or strategies that could be used to connect birth to 5 and K through 12 to create more of a continuum of language learning? All right, so while you're thinking about that, Melody will show them the kind of next step slides and flip through some resources, but give that some thought and add it to the chat box. So with next steps in mind, some of what you're talking about, connecting this age continuum as you think about it, that's an important next step. But we'd also like you to think about, what would you like to see begin or continue in your tribe or Indigenous community to support language learning? You might have a wish that if you could wave a magic wand, you would love to see it happen. So please feel free to share that as well. And well, let's see. So basically, we've tried to use the chat box as much as we can, since we're not in person for you all to do peer-to-peer sharing. The chat box has served to do some peer-to-peer sharing, because some of the greatest ideas come from these opportunities to connect your ideas and examples through conversation. So it may help to inspire others, and we deeply appreciate you sharing with each other in the chat box throughout today's session. So we're going to flip through some resources while you all continue to share. You'll see at the end of the slide, there are several resources, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box. So slides 36 through 41 of the presentation, you'll be able to access these resources that we're going to show you via the ACF, the Administration for Children and Families Office of Child Care website, through the link that is now in the chat box, and also through the National Center on Tribal Early Childhood Development. And you'll see several of these resources that we're kind of flipping through. And then we'll end on a quote that we have here. So we'd like to thank you all for being with us today in this session, and end with a quote from Sitting Bull of the Dakota Nation. So he's quoted as saying, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children." So this quote helps us to remember to work together to make the life that you want to see for the children in your tribe and Indigenous communities. And we're here to support you. We hope that this peer-to-peer conversation has been helpful. We hope that you're able to take a look at several of the resources shared, and feel free to reach out if there's anything else you need. But Chimigwech, a big thank you to all of you for everything that you do. We hope you've enjoyed this session and that you enjoy this year's ANA Language Summit. So have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.